So I'm going to share in this podcast how I lost $1 million. And I want you to listen to this podcast very closely because you're probably losing, or you may have lost in the past, multiple millions and not even known. I want you to take away as much as possible from this, but mainly I want you to start today from an investing standpoint. I'm not going to force anybody to invest, but if you can learn from my stupidity and my mistakes, that is a blessing to me. And I can use my mistakes to help you. That's always a win-win. So I'm going to walk through exactly how this happened. It's really embarrassing, but it's also, how I grew up. So I grew up with zero financial literacy, and it was a very middle-class household. We had food, we had, shelter, we had schooling, we had education, but we never had financial literacy. So we grew up in a very normal, middle-class, everyday American type of household. What I wish I would have known was what I learned at 23 years old when I started at Deloitte, which was financial education in a nutshell. But I didn't. And so growing up, I was always told to save a bunch of money and have a good time and, live it up when you're young. And that was kind of the general, messaging throughout my household. And not to say it's wrong to have fun and, grow up and enjoy your young, when you're young, but if you can literally just take the money you're making during the young ages that you work and you just put those in a retirement account or investment account of some sort versus a savings account, your life will change by millions of dollars. And so I'm going to walk through exactly the numbers, all the detail of what I did and the mistake I made. So starting at age 15, I worked at McDonald's, Buttermilk Pike, exit 186 in Northern Kentucky. Shout out to my fellow McDonald's workers. And we were doing the cash register, the fries, the takeout window, whatever the case was. And I worked there for, a couple years. I worked at a few different restaurants, actually, Skyline Chili. So all my Cincinnati folks, I worked at Skyline Chili on Buttermilk as well. I worked at Oriental Walk, a bunch of restaurant jobs during high school, obviously, right? And from, let's call it 15 to 17 years old, I made a pretty decent living. So I was at McDonald's making $7.25 an hour. That was minimum wage at the time in Kentucky. Worked about 20 hours a week for 52 weeks out of the year. Let's just estimate here. And let's say we made about $7,540. Now, I didn't have any living expenses. I lived at my house. I was, fresh out of, grade school, essentially at that age. So I was at my house. I didn't pay for food. I didn't even have hardly a car at that point in time. It was like my parents used to drop me off early on. But all of those things were taken care of. Therefore, I could save pretty much all my income. Let's say after taxes, I could literally save 100%. Now, I'm not saying you have to, but let's say I could. And I really actually did. I probably saved about 95% of my income. So if I take that number, that's about $5,278. If I start that process of taking that money and investing it versus taking that money and saving like I did, my whole life would have changed in a massive way. But I didn't. So I went across the street because, back in my day, McDonald's, they would give you a physical check. Like, it seems very outdated. I'm kind of aging myself here. But, this was, 17 years ago at this point in time? So they give me a physical check. And I would go across the street in my mom's minivan, and I would drop off my check at PNC Bank. And I thought I was a big baller at that point in time. Because across the board with all my friends, and remember, I was in a middle-class area, so I had the most money by far. And, we talked about it all the time. So, my friends would be like, how much money you got, man? I'm like, got $1,000. And we would save all our money from work, or at least I would. They would usually spend it. I was pretty good at saving. But I never was taught to actually invest that money. And I wish I would have just known if I opened a Roth IRA and put my earned income in there and just put in an S&P 500 fund or something basic like a total market fund, my life would be different by millions of dollars in the future. But I didn't know that because I didn't know any better. Because I didn't come from financial education. And that's okay if you're listening to this and you haven't either, but you're listening to my mistake, so learn from it. Because if you don't learn from my mistake, you're going to end up making it yourself, and it's going to be too late. So I want you to take this education today that I'm talking about and apply it to your life. In short, invest today. But let's walk through the details. So McDonald's and Skyline, Oriental Walk, like I said, restaurant jobs, making pretty good money, $7,000, $12,000 the next year, $12,000 the following year. Taking pretty much all of that and saving that money. And I remember that kind of brought me up to the end of high school. I also had some mason side jobs, mason work, brick and stone. My father-in-law was a mason. And so I'd work with him on the side. Never really worked for him full-time in high school until the first year of college. But that couple of years, I made a good amount of money. And if I would have invested that money at that age, I would have had $15,000 invested. But I remember specifically, I was a freshman in college. And we were at Betty Johnson on U of L's campus, the University of Louisville, where I graduated. My friend's taking a shot, of course, Friday night. We're talking big game because the girls are over, and it was kind of embarrassing. But, we were talking about our bank balances, I think. the flexes we had back then. Don't take dating advice from me. And so so we were talking about our money and how much money we had, and I had the most. I had like $10,000, but it was all saved, because if I would have invested that money, it would have grown $5,000 in that short amount of time, which was crazy to think about, but it would have, based on basic math here. And so we were talking about it, and I thought I was really cool, and I was making a lot of money. And I remember going to the ATM that night to get money out to probably get my, who knows, Burnett's vodka. It was a very weird, different time back then, guys, as a freshman in college. And my friend peered over my shoulder, tried to see what my bank balance was. He's like, "Are you telling the truth?" And he saw it, and he was amazed. And it was funny. It was kind of a weird thing that Matt did, but Matt did it nonetheless. And, at that time, I thought I was doing really well. And I was told I was doing really well. And this is like the mindset most middle class and, individuals live their whole entire life. They've been told they're doing well. It makes sense. I mean, logically, I'm saving money. Makes a lot of sense. But the reality is I'm getting nowhere. And so, although I had some cash, it was being eaten alive by inflation, when I could have literally taken that money, instead of opening with a PNC bank account with like 4 clicks, I could have opened a Roth IRA with also 4 clicks and done the same exact thing. And it would really not be any different, besides I would be investing versus saving. But I did not do that. So my, let's call it senior year, going to college somewhat, and also college summer, the first summer, I was doing a lot of mason work. Made a lot of money with my father-in-law. For that age, I think I was making $15 under the table. Don't tell the IRS, but I pretty much could save all of it as well, because I was working from, I was at home. And I really didn't have many expenses at that point in time. Obviously gas, insurance, car insurance, I think that there wasn't much. And so let's say $18,000. I could have saved a lot of that money. And if I calculate this correctly, obviously these are somewhat of estimates, but pretty accurate to what I actually did. I would have grown that to about $38,000 by the age of 19, which is crazy. I also got a job at Sprint, the cell phone company, and they've obviously merged since, but that's, again, dating myself a little bit. Also some side jobs, some mason, with my father-in-law again, and I made decent money. I really did. I made a lot of money. That Sprint and side jobs, I made about $19,000 roughly that year, and that would have grown, like I said, to about like $38,000 at the age of 19 years old. But I didn't have anywhere near that, by the way. So obviously the compounding growth, as you see, is starting to grow as we're speaking about this. It was like 5, then it was 15, then it was like 38. My cash balance was always roughly $8,000 to $10,000. Didn't know where it was going, had no idea, wasn't being invested. It was all saved, and it just stayed in the same amount the whole time, because I was getting $2 per interest per month, maybe, if that. That's gracious. And so as I transitioned into the workforce, like real true, like I was starting to go to college, get my internships, all that kind of stuff. My first internship, like I said, was at Sprint. It was kind of a college thing, unofficial internship per se, making decent money. But my first real internship was at Louisville Gas and Electric. That's in Louisville downtown, right across from the Yum Center. Shout out to my cards, L1C4. Shout out to Teddy Bridgewater for turning me down to go to the Browns. He should have done it, but whatever. Long story short, he did not. He told me he did not want to ever play for the Browns, face to face. But anyways, Teddy's a good guy. I hope he's all well. I know he just retired, and I made a ton of money that first year at my internship. I made like $52,000. So like I was making like $25, $26 an hour roughly. I think I got a bonus or something like that. And I was working pretty much full time, summers and stuff like that. It was a lot of money. And again, I saved it. But if I would have invested it, that would have grown to about $69,000. It's starting to really hurt my stomach even as I talk about this. And I continue to think I was doing the right thing. That's what's crazy about this whole thing. Like most people think they're doing the right thing. Like they don't think they're doing the wrong thing. If you knew better, you do better. But I was still of the same mindset: save money, work hard, do the basics. You'll be fine. That's what I was taught. And so why would I think any differently, right? Until I changed who I was with, and it's coming shortly. So I worked at LG&E, but I also transitioned into Deloitte as my internship, and I really wanted that Deloitte internship. That was a Big Four internship. If you get a job at the Big Four, that's what you want out of school. Like that's the best, in my opinion, at least the best job you could land as an accountant, CPA. I was also double, major finance and accounting, but for the sake of this, I was like, man, sign me up. I'm going to get my CPA. I'm going to work at Deloitte. There's going to be a lot of smart people. I can move my way up. this is the best launch for my career. I landed the perfect job. That first year, like I think we made like $50,000 or so. And I could have invested pretty much all of it because I lived at home studying for my CPA, but I didn't, of course. And, it is what it is, but made a lot of money. And if I would have invested all that money that I made, that would be $112,000 from a compounded rolling, interest perspective. My first year at Deloitte really changed the game for me. And so I was 22, making $52,000 per year, not investing a dime, living at home, like I said, getting my CPA. And if I would have listened faster to everyone in my circle, I would be richer today. But I didn't. And so when I got to Deloitte and I realized these individuals are really wealthy. My first mentor was Toy Cavanaugh. Shout out to Toy. Love you a lot. And she made me invest my first $115 into my 401k. I was making, like I said, roughly $52,000 per year. And I think it was 6% into the 401k. And if you divide that by 26 pay periods, it works out to be roughly $115 per pay period. And I remember thinking like I was losing that money. And Toy was like, no, you're not. This is your investments for your future. Like, you really need to do this. I'm like, yeah, but like I want money in my bank account. I'm like, but that was the mental frame I had, which was crazy to think about at this point in time. But, obviously as a 32-year-old now with the wealth we built, like to think that my 22-year-old self was afraid to invest in a 401k, like is mind-boggling in a sense. I'm like, man, that kind of hurts my stomach. But that's how I was. But anyways, I invested that first 401k. And I remember at the end of that year, I went to a party at Bob Bitter's house. And he was the partner on Vantiv at the time, now WorldPay, one of the biggest clients I had at Deloitte. And we were celebrating the end of busy season where you work like 100 hours and you look like a scarecrow and you look horrible. And you feel horrible. That's the Deloitte grind during busy season for all my Big Four accountants. And we were talking about, we were at his house, and he was showing me his wine collection, which was something that my parents didn't talk about, to say the least. He was showing me his China. I didn't know what China, I thought that was a country. I didn't know that was literal China. And that was like the mindset, that's kind of the lifestyle I grew up with, just very normal middle class, right? Then he walked me upstairs, and I remember specifically, there was this piece of furniture. My wife's really into that kind of stuff. She kind of knew. She's like, that's a lot of money. She whispered to me. And I was like, Bob, what kind of furniture is this? She's like, oh, I got that imported from France or something like that. I don't even remember where it was from, to be honest. And it was like $15,000 for a chair. And I was like, geez, this guy lives a different life, speaks a different, he collects pens. He's a really special dude. Like, he's one of the best guys you'll ever meet. One of my favorite people at Deloitte. And I remember talking about like all this stuff, and he imported his car. I was like, what? Who are you? What do you do? Obviously, at that point in time, I was like, well, he just makes a lot of money. He probably saves a lot of money and uses it on all these fancy things. But what I didn't realize was the conversation that was going to happen that night. And this is Deloitte parties. This isn't like a regular frat party that you're probably thinking about. So we don't have conversations like frat parties do. We were talking about like allocations and investments and, building wealth and buying real estate, stocks, businesses, etc. All things that Bob has done. And he was speaking with so much fluidity throughout his voice about how he's done this and built this wealth. And he's like, I obviously make a lot of money now, but I started just where you were. He's like, here's what I did. And I started listening to that. And it was mind boggling because I was like, man, you started off, I forget what his starting salary was. It was like $20,000 because he's obviously a lot older. So that was like a, equivalent, let's call it, to $50,000 in when I started. He's like, I did this and this and that. I'm like, Bob, obviously we're at a party right now. Let's reconvene in this conversation in the audit room, or, when we talk. I want to continue this conversation. And we continue to talk for, a whole year or two or whatever. I learned so much from him. And it was so obvious how people build wealth. And I was so intrigued by the idea of wealth and how easy it really actually was. And once you just know the right people that tell you the right things, your whole life shifts. And so I know a lot of people out there grew up with the idea of like investing is risky, and, people around me don't do this, but like I was that person. I thought investing was risky. People around me didn't do that, at least to my knowledge. I'm sure people did, but like it wasn't a conversation my friends had. It wasn't a conversation my parents had. So I wasn't going to go talk to neighbor parents about investing. And so it was just my assumption that you just don't do that. And like those were beliefs, deep held beliefs for 16 to really up to 23 years. And if I continued down that path of thinking, not changing the way I think and rewiring my brain, I would be continually not ever getting ahead. My net worth at that point in time was negative $8,000. So from age 15 to 22, I made roughly $220,000 collectively through internships, mason work, side jobs, restaurant jobs, all that stuff. That's an 8-year span. I made really good money, like I said. And if I would have invested that money throughout the entire time, at age 40, if, let's call it age 22, I had about $150,000 invested. And I did nothing else. I never invested another dollar. At age 40, I would have $832,000 in my account. But I didn't know. That's almost $1 million. And if you add 2 years to age 42, I would have an extra $1 million added on my net worth at that age. That's not assuming anything else I did up to this point. So literally, if I just invested that money, but I didn't know because I didn't know better. And when I learned this, I changed my family tree because I started investing for my daughters before they were even here. When they were in the womb, I started literally investing for them. My daughter's net worth at 2.5 years old is $25,000. It's because we started this process, and it's not overly complicated. We're not talking complicated investing here. We're talking ETFs and index funds and Roth IRAs, brokerage accounts, HSAs, 401ks, solo 401ks, all those types of accounts. We're talking about buying into businesses, being a minority stakeholder, buying into private equity, buying into stocks, buying into real estate, buying into a little bit of crypto. Some of the most basic things out there. Stocks, real estate, and business, if you just master those, it's huge. But the other thing I did along this journey was I got into circles that talked about this and normalized this. I did not normalize this growing up. So therefore, if someone even would say investing, it would kind of go in one ear and out the other because I don't think it's important. So therefore, I wasn't listening for it. But once at 23 years old, when Bob was talking about all this crazy stuff of allocations and all these like step-by-step procedures to build wealth, what I realized is that there's a process to this. There's a reason I came out with this book, The Roadmap to Financial Freedom. It's literally called A Millionaire's Guide to Building Automated Wealth. Because I figured out the process. Process isn't that hard. But at 22, 23 years old, I thought the process was impossible. I thought I had to save a bunch of money and think I'm a big baller because I had $10,000 in my savings account. And if I would have just put this in investment accounts, it would have grown to, like I said, almost $1 million at the age of 40. It would grow to $1 million by the age of 42. If you want to do the math and to figure out how I got to here, right? Take $150,000 as a beginning balance at age 22. So if you do 18 years, you'll get, using a 10% assumption rate, you will get to, let's call it $832,000. If you do it to 42, like 20 years, you're going to get to $1 million. If you really want to figure out what I lost up to, let's call it age 65, just do the additional math. Do the extra amount of years, an extra 20 years or whatever the case is, to figure out what I really, really lost. I'll let you do the exercise to figure out how much you may be losing right now in a good way. Because the earlier you figure this out, the better you're going to be, because time is the biggest wealth building factor by a long shot. Your money goes really, really far. I tweeted the other day something really crazy. So by the age of 60, every dollar invested in your 20s is worth $45. By the age of 60, every dollar invested in your 30s is now only 17. So just from 20 to 30, it's a significant drop off. By the age of 60, every dollar invested in your 40s is now $7. As you see, the numbers are going down. They're going less. They're meaning less the older you get, because the more time you have, the more they mean to you, and the more they mean to your overall balance. By the age of 60, every dollar invested in your 50s is worth only $3. So still better than nothing. And I don't want to discourage anybody that's older on the older side. You better get started is what I'm saying. Like, there is no time to wait. And if you're young, if you don't want to lose millions of dollars like I did, then you would probably want to start now, is all I'm going to say. And I would never force anybody to. I know there's a lot of emotional baggage around investing in money and stuff like that. But here's what I'll say is I'll help you. If you need help, just always let me know. And you can come in my DMs, you can email me, whatever the case is. You can join the Millionaire Club. That's a step 1 starter program in the show notes below, whatever the case is. You get to decide that for you. But if you don't take the steps to start investing today, you're going to come to the aha moment at some point in your life, I'm very certain of it, where you're going to know, oh crap, I wish I would have listened to that podcast a little more close. I wish I would have paid attention a little closer because at the time, I didn't want to spend money on education. I didn't want to spend money on a Budget Dog's $30 book that goes 100% to, proceeds to Dravet syndrome. Whatever the case, whatever's going through your head is, I don't want to spend money. But if you don't spend money on education, or just go to my YouTube or whatever you want for free, I don't care, you're not going to move forward. And that money you're afraid to spend $30. I had somebody say, what's the cost of your book? I go, what's the cost of not having my book? Respectfully, because it's going to cost you a lot of money not to know this stuff. And so you might not feel it come out of your pocket, but make every intentional effort to have the cash or to get into these different programs that we offer here to change your life, because it will. We see it every single day, and I could go on for days and days about how people's net worth just skyrockets. Lacey Conway just increased her net worth by $70,000 in 2 months of my program. That's not an accident. There wasn't an accident I grew my net worth to $2.6 million by the age of 32 once I paid attention. From 22 to 32, we went crazy. We went nuclear. And it was because I learned a lot of stuff from Bob, starting at that party at Deloitte in his literal basement, talking about allocations, investments, and realizing this guy knows what he's talking about. Loved, where I came from, but people around me didn't really know what they were talking about from an investment and wealth building perspective. And everyone I knew worked jobs their whole entire life. They never retired early. That was not a very conversation. And it's so doable if you have the right access, the right education, and things of that nature. I saw a Luke Belmar video. Shout out to Luke. When he comes in Dallas, we're going to be meeting. But Luke Belmar was talking about he joined and paid $100,000 per year to join, I think, the Ritz-Carlton Reserve Group or whatever. Don't quote me on that. But it was $100,000. And he's like, somebody asked, why would you pay that much money to join that? He's like, because I'm talking to billionaires every single day. He's like, the access I have to these individuals is bar none. $100,000 to a billionaire is pennies. And if that billionaire gives me a connection or hooks me up with knowledge or a job or whatever the case is, or an idea that I never had because I just didn't know any better, that's going to change my life by way more than $100,000 per year. And so it was an obvious choice. And, that's something I've realized early on. Even Frank Leggio at Deloitte told me that. He's like, you should join a country club. I'm like, I don't want to pay that much money for a country club. Shout out to Frank. He's an excellent mentor at Deloitte. And one of my favorite people there as well, Bob, Toy, and Frank were like the three biggest, mentors at Deloitte. And Frank literally was like, you should be joining a country club. I was like, that's just like kind of like uppity. Because that's the lifestyle I came from. I was like, country clubs are like, not me. Is my belief. I had a belief. And that belief was silly. But what Frank said is like, I make partnerships with people all the time. As a partner at Deloitte, I bring in business just from going up there on a Friday night, having a glass of wine with my wife. I run into somebody that's a CEO or the owner of some company in the local area. And all of a sudden we're doing business and I bring him revenue for the company. He's like, I'm drinking a glass of wine doing nothing. He's like, but that's what wealth is. It's partnerships. It's access. It's education. It's knowing more. Because when you know more, you'll do better. And so whatever you take from this podcast, obviously start now. But if you need the help, you always can come and ask us. That's what we're here for. So with that being said, I hope you guys take this and really, really apply it today, because it's going to be a massive piece of your wealth building puzzle. And I'll see you guys on next episode.
You've been listening to Money on My Mind with your host, Brendan Schlagbaum. If you found value in today's discussion, share it with someone who could benefit from it too. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast if you haven't already, so you never miss a money mastery tip. Until next time, stay passionate about your financial journey and keep taking bold steps towards your money goals.